Thwack! Terry's gloved fist cracked across Pixis's spiked jaw. The Una's champion's head snapped back in a spray of purplish blood. The crowd fell silent at the decisive blow. The Una's homeworld's dimly lit arena was packed for this duel of champions. Whoever won would rule the loser's planet. Undefeated Una's warrior Pixis faced Earth's top fighter Terry, a muscular man with a scarred eye. Terry sized up his foe, 7 feet tall reptilian with razor claws and a spike-tipped tail. Known for brutal, no-holds-barred fighting, but Terry had to win at all costs. Humanity had bested the Unas at every turn, in science, tech, and talks. Now this fight would settle things for good. If Terry lost, the cruel Unas would enslave Earth. Billions would suffer and die under their rule. The arena was pure Unas brutality. Skulls lined the walls, blood stained the floor, a testament to countless vicious battles. Pixis circled Terry, hissing through sharp teeth. The crowd chanted, baying for blood. Terry tensed, fists up, ready to do whatever it took. Earth needed a hero today. The fate of everything rested on Terry's shoulders. Losing was not an option. A spike-tipped tail whipped around in a blur. It caught Terry in the ribs, launching him back. He crashed to the ground, the wind knocked from his lungs. The crowd roared their approval, bloodlust surging as the human struggled to rise. Pixis was on him in an instant, claws raining down in a frenzy of slashes. Terry rolled and blocked, deflecting the worst of the assault. But one talon found its mark, slicing a deep gash across his forearm. Crimson blood splattered the arena floor. Terry clenched his jaw against the searing pain. He couldn't let Pixis gain the advantage again. Feigning left, he dove right, tackling the Una's champion to the ground. They grappled and strained, fighting for dominance on the gore-slicked stone. Pixis's raw strength was staggering, but Terry's skill and sheer determination kept him in the match. As they wrestled in a tangle of limbs, Terry's eye caught a glint of something. A strange pendant hung from Pixis's neck, pulsing with an unsettling emerald light. A wave of unease washed over Terry. Something about that amulet felt wrong, dangerous. But before he could ponder it further, Pixis wrenched free from his grasp. The Una's warrior sprang to his feet, putting distance between them. The two champions circled one another, chests heaving from exertion. The crowd's frenzied chanting swelled, baying for the duel to continue. Terry's eyes flicked to his bleeding arm, then back to Pixis. He had to end this, and fast. His strength wouldn't last forever. His gaze fell on the pendant once more, still glowing with that eerie, viridescent light. A desperate idea began to take shape. What if that amulet was more than mere decoration? What if it somehow fueled Pixis's uncanny might? If he could just get his hands on it, maybe that would be the key to victory, the critical edge he needed to save Earth from the Una's cruel clutches. But how could he possibly wrest it from Pixis's neck? He'd only have one chance. As the battle wore on, Terry couldn't shake the feeling that something was very wrong. Pixis's movements grew swifter, more powerful with each passing second. The Una's warrior's eyes blazed with an otherworldly green light, the same sickly glow emanating from the pendant around his neck. Pixis came at Terry with a flurry of slashes and stabs, his claws and tail whipping through the air at blinding speed. Terry found himself barely able to keep up, his reflexes strained to their absolute limit. He ducked and weaved, but Pixis' attacks were relentless, driving him back step by step. It dawned on Terry that the amulet must be some kind of performance enhancer, granting Pixis unnatural strength and speed. As long as the Una's champion wore it, Terry stood no chance of winning this fight fairly. He had to get that pendant off Pixis's neck, and fast. Feigning a low kick, Terry lunged forward, arm outstretched to snatch the glowing amulet. But Pixis was ready for him. The Una's warrior's hand shot out, clamping around Terry's wrist in an iron grip. Terry felt the bones in his arm grind together as Pixis lifted him bodily off the ground, snarling in triumph. Dangling helplessly, Terry stared into Pixis's face, now a twisted mask of rage. The Una's warrior's maw gaped open, revealing rows of dagger-like teeth. Terry's mind raced, desperate for a way out of this predicament. His gaze fell on a loose stone jutting from the arena floor. With a burst of strength, Terry kicked the rock up into Pixis's face. It struck the Una's warrior square in the eye, eliciting a roar of pain. Pixis's grip loosened, and Terry wrenched his arm free. Seizing his chance, Terry lunged forward once more. This time his fingers closed around the pendant, and he ripped it away from Pixis's neck with a sharp tug. The moment the amulet left the Una's warrior's body, Pixis staggered back as if struck. His strength seemed to drain away in an instant, leaving him visibly weakened. Terry stared at the pendant in his hand, realization dawning. This thing hadn't just been enhancing Pixis's abilities, it had been controlling him, puppeting his actions. Without its influence, the Una's champion was exposed, vulnerable. Pressing his advantage, Terry unleashed a barrage of powerful blows aimed at Pixis's head and torso. The Una's warrior reeled under the onslaught, his defenses crumbling with each strike. Terry drove forward relentlessly, sensing victory within his grasp. But as he moved in for the finishing blow, Terry hesitated. He caught a glimpse of Pixis's eyes wide with genuine fear. In that moment he saw not a monstrous alien foe, but a living, thinking being. A creature that perhaps had never truly wanted to be in this arena at all. Making a snap decision, Terry hurled the pendant aside. It clattered across the blood-stained floor, its eerie light fading. He would win this battle on his own merits, not through the twisted power of some alien artifact. As the pendant clattered across the arena floor, its sickly green light fading, Pixis blinked and shook his head, as if emerging from a trance. He looked around, confusion etched on his reptilian features. His eyes, no longer blazing with that unnatural glow, held a lost, disoriented expression. Terry watched him warily, muscles tensed and ready for any sudden moves. But Pixis made no aggressive motion. Instead, his gaze locked with Terry's, and in that moment, an unspoken understanding passed between them. They were both warriors, bound by a code of honor that transcended species. Slowly, deliberately, Pixis sank to one knee, bowing his head in a gesture of surrender. The arena fell deathly silent, the crowd stunned by this unexpected turn. Terry stepped forward cautiously, hand outstretched in an offer of truce. Pixis hesitated, then reached out and clasped Terry's hand, allowing himself to be helped to his feet. In that brief touch, a bond was forged between the two fighters, a respect born of shared struggle and sacrifice. But before either could speak, a flurry of movement caught their attention. From the shadows ringing the arena, a group of hooded figures emerged, converging on Terry and Pixis in a tightening circle. Terry tensed, readying himself for another fight. But the figures made no threatening moves. Instead, they lowered their hoods in a show of deference. One stepped forward, an elderly Unas with faded scales and knowing eyes. "I am Zephyr," he rasped, "leader of the resistance against our corrupt government." He gestured to the pendant lying abandoned on the ground. Zephyr turned back to Terry, gratitude shining in his aged eyes. "By removing the pendant, you have freed him from their influence. You have our thanks." He paused, then continued cautiously. "In fact, we have a proposal. An alliance between Earth and our resistance, to overthrow this tyrannical regime once and for all. Together we could bring peace to both our worlds." Terry hesitated, suspicion warring with opportunity in his mind. Could he trust this Zephyr? Was it wise to ally Earth with Una's rebels he'd just met? And yet, the alternative was returning to a Cold War footing, an arms race that could devastate both civilizations. "I'll agree to an alliance," Terry said at last, choosing his words carefully. "On the condition that Earth's interests are protected. We're equals in this." "So of course," Zephyr nodded, relief palpable. He extended his hand and Terry clasped it, sealing the deal with a handshake. As he did, he caught a flicker of something in Zephyr's eyes. Doubt? Calculation? He couldn't be sure. Terry released Zephyr's hand, a chill running down his spine despite the arena's oppressive heat. Had he just made a deal with the devil? Only time would tell. For now, all he could do was remain vigilant. Earth's fate hung in the balance. The arena shook with the force of a nearby explosion. Terry and Zephyr locked eyes, their conversation cut short by the sudden chaos outside. Screams pierced the air, accompanied by the staccato rhythm of gunfire. "The city is under attack," Zephyr hissed, his aged face twisting with worry. "The government must have discovered our presence." Terry nodded grimly, already moving towards the exit. "We need to get out there, help defend your people." They burst from the arena into a scene of utter devastation. Buildings crumbled, flames licking at their foundations. Civilians ran in blind panic, desperately seeking shelter from the onslaught. A phalanx of heavily armed Una's soldiers marched down the main thoroughfare, firing indiscriminately into the crowd. Terry's heart clenched at the sight of the carnage. He turned to Zephyr, jaw set with determination. "Gather your fighters. We'll take the battle to them." Zephyr barked orders to his followers, and within moments a ragtag group of resistance members had assembled. Among them, Pixis stood tall, his eyes clear and focused despite his recent ordeal. "I'm with you," the Unas warrior rumbled, his voice a low growl. "My strength is yours." Terry clasped Pixis's forearm in a warrior's grip, a silent acknowledgement passing between them. Then, as one, the group surged forward into the fray. They wove through the embattled streets, dodging rubble and energy blasts. Terry led the charge, his reflexes honed by years of training. He ducked behind a burnt-out hovercar, signaling for the others to take cover. Peering around the vehicle's twisted frame, Terry spotted a pocket of resistance fighters pinned down by government fire. He motioned to Zephyr and Pixis, outlining a plan with quick hand gestures. On Terry's signal, they broke from cover, rushing to aid their beleaguered allies. Terry and Pixis laid down suppressing fire, energy bolts sizzling through the smoky air. Zephyr and his followers used the distraction to flank the enemy position, catching the government soldiers in a deadly crossfire. For a moment, it seemed as though the tide might turn. Terry and his companions fought with skill and courage, pushing the enemy back block by hard-won block. But the government forces were relentless, their numbers seemingly inexhaustible. As fatigue began to take its toll, Terry saw the resistance's lines beginning to buckle. They were losing ground, the enemy's superior firepower forcing them to give way. A desperate plan began to take shape in Terry's mind. If they could infiltrate the building, cut off the head of the snake, they might still have a chance. He turned to Zephyr and Pixis, his voice low and urgent over the din of battle. "I have an idea," he said, outlining his scheme in quick, clipped tones. Zephyr's eyes narrowed, but he nodded in agreement. "It's risky," the old Unas said, "but it may be our only hope." They gathered a hand-picked team of their best fighters, each one ready to lay down their life for the cause. With grim determination, they set off towards the military headquarters, picking their way through the rubble-strewn streets. As they approached the building's entrance, Terry's heart sank. It was guarded by a phalanx of elite Unas warriors, each one bristling with advanced weaponry. Getting inside would be no easy feat. But Terry knew they had no choice. The fate of Earth, of the Unas' resistance, hung in the balance. Failure was not an option. He met Pix's eyes, saw the same steely resolve reflected there. With a deep breath, Terry signaled the team to move in. They charged forward, energy weapons blazing, ready to face whatever dangers lay ahead. Terry and his team charged forward, energy weapons blazing. They stormed the entrance of the Unas military headquarters, catching the elite guards by surprise. The confined corridors worked to the rebels' advantage, allowing them to engage the enemy in close-quarters combat. Pixis took the lead, his intimate knowledge of the building's layout guiding them through the maze-like structure. He moved with a lethal grace, his powerful frame twisting and weaving as he dispatched the Unas warriors with brutal efficiency. Behind him, Terry and Zephyr coordinated their attacks, picking off stragglers and providing covering fire. The air crackled with the sizzle of energy bolts and the sickening crunch of bone on bone. Deeper they pushed into the heart of the headquarters, the resistance growing with each step. Finally they reached a heavily fortified command center, its doors sealed tight against intrusion. Perxis stepped forward, his claws making short work of the reinforced metal. The doors buckled and gave way, revealing a scene of controlled chaos within. High-ranking UNA's officials cowered behind a wall of loyal soldiers, their faces twisted with fear and rage. At their center stood the corrupt leader himself, his eyes cold and calculating. "So you're too late," he sneered, his voice dripping with contempt. "My fleet is already on its way. Surrender now, and I may spare your miserable lives." Terry stepped forward, his weapon trained on the leader's heart. "Not a chance," he growled. "Your reign of terror ends today." The corrupt leader laughed, a harsh, grating sound. "You really think you can stop me? You're nothing more than a minor inconvenience, a fly to be swatted." He gestured to his soldiers. "Kill them!" In that moment, all hell broke loose. The UNA's warriors opened fire, their weapons spitting deadly energy. Terry and his team dove for cover, returning fire with everything they had. Perxis leaped into the fray, his claws and tail a blur of motion. He tore through the enemy ranks, his strength and speed more than a match for their numbers. Zephyr and the resistance fighters provided cover, their shots precise and deadly. They kept the officials pinned down, preventing them from escaping or calling for reinforcements. Terry, meanwhile, had only one target in mind. He weaved through the chaos of the battle, his reflexes sharp and his aim true. Energy blasts sizzled past his head, close enough to singe his hair, but he paid them no heed. The corrupt leader saw him coming and panicked. He turned to flee, his cowardice overriding his bravado, but Terry was faster. He lunged forward, tackling the leader to the ground. They grappled on the blood-slicked floor, trading blows with savage intensity. Terry felt the leader's fist connect with his jaw, sending stars exploding across his vision. He retaliated with a vicious uppercut, feeling the satisfying crunch of cartilage beneath his knuckles. The corrupt leader staggered back, his nose a ruined mess, but still he came on, desperation lending him strength. They crashed into a bank of monitors, the screens shattering in a spray of glass and sparks. Terry felt the jagged edges slice into his skin, but he ignored the pain. He had to end this, and quickly. Every second they fought was another second the UNA's fleet drew closer. If he didn't stop the bombardment... Terry's eyes fell on a shard of glass, its edge wickedly sharp. He snatched it up, the makeshift weapon fitting comfortably in his grip. The corrupt leader saw the glass and paled. He scrabbled backward, his hands slipping in the blood and gore. "Wait," he pleaded, his voice high and thin. "I surrender. I'll call off the fleet." Terry hesitated, the glass poised to strike. He knew he should accept the surrender, spare the leader's life, but a darker part of him, the part that had seen too much death and suffering, yearned to end it once and for all. He looked to Pixis and Zephyr, saw the same conflict raging in their eyes. The fate of two worlds hung in the balance, the decision resting squarely on his shoulders. In that moment, time seemed to stand still. Terry's mind raced, the consequences of his actions playing out in a dizzying array of possibilities. He knew that whatever he chose, there would be no going back. As Terry grappled with the corrupt leader, a glint of metal caught his eye. There on the leader's wrist was a device not unlike the pendant that had controlled Pixis, but this one looked more complex, more advanced. In a flash of insight, Terry realized this must be how the leader maintained his iron grip on the UNA's population and his own soldiers. If he could just get his hands on it. With a grunt of effort, Terry managed to pin the thrashing leader to the ground, but his foe was far from defeated. A hidden blade snicked out from the leader's gauntlet, slashing at Terry's face. Terry reeled back, feeling the hot sting of blood dripping from a gash above his eye. It was the opening the leader needed. He broke free of Terry's grasp and made a desperate run for the command center's control panel. Terry cursed and gave chase, weaving past the last few loyal soldiers still putting up a fight. He caught up to the leader just as he reached the panel. They crashed into it together, grappling furiously for control. Sparks flew from damaged circuitry as they traded blows, each seeking to overpower the other. In the chaos, Terry's flailing hand accidentally brushed a large button. The command center's main view screen flickered to life, drawing their attention to a chilling sight. The Una's fleet hung in orbit, weapons primed and ready to fire on the capital below, just as the leader had threatened. Time was running out. Desperation lent Terry strength. With a savage cry, he wrenched the control device from the leader's wrist. The leader howled in pain and rage, but Terry didn't relent. He slammed the leader against the panel, the impact knocking him out cold. Panting, Terry turned his focus to the control device now in his hands. His mind raced as he tried to make sense of the alien controls. He had to find a way to stop the fleet, or thousands of innocent lives would be lost. "There's only one way," Zephyr said grimly, appearing suddenly at Terry's side. "We can use that device to broadcast a self-destruct signal to the ships. It will stop the attack." Terry's heart sank as he realized the cost. "But that would destroy the device too. We'd lose any chance of using it to free your people from the government's control." Zephyr's aged eyes held a world of sorrow. "I know." The weight of the impossible choice bore down on Terry. Save the city and condemn the Unas to continued servitude, or free them and let the capital burn. Every second that slipped away brought the fleet closer to firing. Terry stared at the device in his hands, his mind awhirl with conflicting thoughts. The lives of thousands hung in the balance, their fate resting squarely on his next action. The walls of the command center seemed to close in around him, the air growing thick with tension. Terry's fingers trembled as they hovered over the control device, the weight of the impossible decision bearing down on him. The seconds ticked by, each one an eternity, as he stared at the view screen. The Una's fleet hung in orbit, weapons primed and ready to rain destruction upon the city below. With a heavy heart, Terry activated the self-destruct sequence. The device pulsed once, twice, then went dark in his hands. For a heartbeat, nothing happened. Then, the view screen erupted in a blaze of light. The Una's ships blossomed into fireballs, their hulls shattering under the force of the explosions. Debris spun through the void, glittering like macabre confetti. The fleet was gone, consumed by the very weapons they had sought to unleash. Terry sagged against the control panel, his breath coming in ragged gasps. He had done it. The city was safe. But at what cost? Zephyr laid a hand on his shoulder, his aged face etched with sorrow. "You made the right choice," he said softly, "but I fear our fight is far from over." They gathered their wounded and regrouped with the rest of the resistance. Pixis limped over to join them, his scales scorched and his body battered, but alive. A somber silence hung over the group as they took stock of their situation. The command center lay in ruins around them, a testament to the ferocity of the battle. The corrupt government had been dealt a grievous blow, but Terry knew they would not go down easily. And without the control device, the resistance had lost their best hope of freeing the Unas from their oppressors. As they prepared to leave, a sudden movement caught Terry's eye. The corrupt leader, thought to be unconscious, was crawling towards a fallen weapon, his movements sluggish but determined. Terry reacted on instinct, diving for the leader just as his fingers closed around the gun. They crashed to the floor in a tangle of limbs, grappling for control of the weapon. The leader was weak, his strength fading, but desperation lent him a manic energy. Terry felt the cold press of the gun barrel against his chest, saw the leader's finger tighten on the trigger. The shot rang out, deafening in the confines of the command center. But the pain Terry expected never came. Instead, he saw Pixis, the Unas warrior's clawed hand wrapped around the leader's wrist, wrenching the gun away. The two Unas struggled, locked in a deadly embrace. Terry scrambled to his feet, ready to intervene, but Pixis snarled at him to stay back. This was a reckoning long overdue, a fight that could only be settled between Unas. Terry watched, his heart in his throat, as Pixis and the leader traded blows. It was a battle of wills as much as strength, a clash of ideologies. Pixis fighting for freedom and justice, the leader clinging to the vestiges of his power. In the end, there could be only one victor. With a final desperate lunge, Pixis seized the leader by the throat. The corrupt ruler's eyes bulged, his scaly skin turning a sickly shade of green. There was a sickening crack, and the leader went limp in Pixis's grasp. The Una's warrior let the body fall to the floor, his chest heaving with exertion. The reign of the corrupt government was over, their tyrannical rule brought to an abrupt and bloody end. But as Pixis stood over the fallen leader, his face grim and his eyes haunted, Terry knew their true battle was only just beginning. The dust settled slowly over the ruins of the Una's command center, the acrid stench of burnt circuitry and charred flesh hanging heavy in the air. Terry stood amidst the carnage, his chest heaving with exertion and emotion. He looked to Pixis, the Una's warrior's scales spattered with the blood of his former comrades. A silent understanding passed between them. The battle was won, but at a terrible cost. Zephyr emerged from the shadows, his aged face etched with sorrow and determination. "We must move quickly," he urged, his voice a hoarse whisper. "The Loyalists will regroup, and they will not rest until they have avenged their fallen leader." Terry nodded, his mind already racing with the challenges that lay ahead. With the help of the Resistance and the support of the Earth Alliance, they set to work establishing a new provisional government for the Una's people. It was a daunting task, fraught with political and logistical hurdles, but Terry threw himself into it with the same tenacity he had shown in the arena. As the days turned into weeks, progress was made in fits and starts. Terry, hailed as a hero by both the Unas and humanity, took on the role of diplomat and advisor. He spent long hours in meetings and negotiations, working tirelessly to foster understanding and cooperation between the two species. But even as the fledgling government began to take shape, troubling reports started to filter in from the outer colonies. Pixis, now a key figure in the new Unas military, received disturbing intelligence about Loyalist activity in the far reaches of Unas space. "They're regrouping," Pixis growled, his claws flexing with barely contained rage. "The Loyalists see us as traitors to our kind, and they'll stop at nothing to regain control." Terry and Zephyr exchanged worried glances. The wounds of the recent conflict were still raw, and the idea of plunging back into violence so soon was a bitter pill to swallow. "We must tread carefully," Zephyr cautioned, his brow furrowed in thought. "If we resort to force now, we risk undoing all the progress we've made." But as the weeks dragged on, the Loyalist threat only grew. Guerrilla attacks on government facilities and supporters became more frequent and more brazen. Terry found himself caught between his desire for peace and the need to protect the fragile new order he had fought so hard to build. Late one night, as Terry pored over intelligence reports in his makeshift office, a message came through on his secure channel. His blood ran cold as he read the Loyalists' ultimatum. They had captured a group of human diplomats and were holding them hostage. The price for their release? Terry's surrender. He knew it was a trap, a ploy to lure him out into the open. But the thought of innocent lives hanging in the balance gnawed at him. He couldn't abandon his fellow humans, no matter the risk. Against the vehement objections of Pixis and Zephyr, Terry agreed to the exchange. The rendezvous point was set, a remote asteroid base, far from any potential backup. As Terry's shuttle docked with the base, he steeled himself for whatever lay ahead. The airlock cycled open with a hiss, and he stepped out into a cavernous hangar bay. Heavily armed Loyalists surrounded him in a tight circle, their weapons trained on his every move. The bay doors parted, and a grizzled Unas veteran stepped forward. The Loyalist leader regarded Terry with a sneer of contempt, his eyes glinting with malice. "Welcome, hero," he spat, the words dripping with venom. "I see you received our invitation." Terry held his ground, his voice steady despite the hammering of his heart. "Where are the hostages?" The Loyalist leader let out a barking laugh, the sound echoing harshly off the metal walls. "Oh, there are no hostages, human," he said. "Did you really think we would bargain with the likes of you? No, this was all just a ruse to get you here. And now the galaxy will watch as we execute the great Terry, the champion of the traitorous new government." Terry's stomach lurched as the full extent of the trap dawned on him. The Loyalists meant to kill him, live on the galactic net, a public spectacle to herald their resurgence and the downfall of the provisional government. The Loyalists shoved Terry to his knees, the muzzle of a pulse rifle pressed against the back of his skull. The leader stepped forward, a wicked blade glinting in his clawed hand. But just as he raised the knife for the killing blow, alarms blared throughout the base. The Loyalists looked around in confusion, their formation faltering. Suddenly a blast door exploded inward, torn from its hinges by a searing bolt of plasma. Through the smoke and debris, Pixis charged into the room, a strike team of Una's commandos at his back. They had secretly followed Terry, unwilling to let him face the Loyalists alone. The hangar erupted into chaos, energy blasts crisscrossing the space as the two sides clashed. Terry sprang to his feet, snatching a fallen weapon and diving for cover beside Pixis. Side by side they fought, just as they had in the arena what seemed like a lifetime ago. Loyalists fell before their combined onslaught, but Terry knew they couldn't keep this up forever. In the confusion, he saw the Loyalist leader slipping away, using the mayhem as cover for his escape. Terry made to go after him, but Pixis held him back. "Let him go," the Una's warrior said, his voice strained with fatigue and pain. "We'll find him another day, for now we survive." As the last of the Loyalists fell or fled, Terry and Pixis stood amidst the smoking ruins of the base, their breath coming in ragged gasps. They had won the day, but both knew this was far from over. The Loyalist leader was still out there, no doubt already plotting his revenge, and Terry couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning of a new chapter in the ongoing struggle for peace and freedom. He looked to Pixis, saw the same grim determination in the Una's warrior's eyes. Whatever came next, they would face it together. For the sake of their peoples, for the future they had fought so hard to build, they had to. Terry opened his mouth to speak, but a sudden searing pain lanced through his side. He looked down to see a dark stain spreading across his torso, just below his ribs. One of the Loyalists' shots must have found its mark after all. As his vision began to tunnel, Terry felt Pixis's strong arms lowering him gently to the deck. The Una's warrior's face swam above him, his words distant and muffled as if heard from underwater. Terry tried to respond, but the words wouldn't come. The darkness was closing in, and with it a strange sense of peace. He had given everything he had to give. The rest was up to Pixis, Zephyr, and the others now. As consciousness faded, Terry's last thought was of Earth, of the green hills and blue skies he had fought so hard to protect. He could only hope that his sacrifice had been enough, that the future he had dreamed of was still within reach. The darkness took him then, and Terry knew no more. In the days that followed the attack on the asteroid base, Terry and Pixis threw themselves into the task of hunting down the remaining Loyalist forces. They raided secret hideouts and safe houses, capturing or killing key members of the insurgency. But despite their best efforts, they always seemed to be one step behind. Zorn, the cunning strategist who had taken command of the Loyalists, proved to be a formidable adversary. He struck without warning, hitting targets that Terry and Pixis had thought secure. Each time they closed in on him, he slipped away, leaving only frustration and a mounting sense of unease in his wake. As the weeks dragged on into months, the strain of the constant conflict began to take its toll. Terry and Pixis, once inseparable comrades, found themselves at odds more and more often. Terry advocated for a more measured approach, hoping to negotiate a peaceful resolution, but Pixis, his patience worn thin by the endless skirmishes and sleepless nights, pushed for swift and decisive action. Their arguments grew more heated, their words more barbed. The easy camaraderie that had once defined their relationship gave way to tense silences and simmering resentment. Then a breakthrough. Terry received a report from an informant about a major Loyalist gathering, a chance to strike a decisive blow against Zorn and his followers. He saw it as an opportunity to end the conflict once and for all, to bring Zorn to the negotiating table and hammer out a lasting peace. But Pixis disagreed. He saw the gathering as a trap, a ploy to lure them into an ambush. He urged Terry to launch an all-out assault to crush the Loyalists with overwhelming force. They argued long into the night, neither willing to back down. In the end, Terry pulled rank, his status as Earth's champion giving him the final say. He would go to the meeting alone, unarmed, as a show of good faith. Pixis stormed out, his scaly features contorted with anger and frustration. Terry watched him go, a sense of unease settling in the pit of his stomach. The meeting place was a desolate moon, far from the bustle of the inhabited systems. Terry set his shuttle down on the rocky surface, the crunch of gravel under his boots the only sound in the oppressive silence. Terry approached slowly, his hands held out to his sides, palms open. He met Zorn's gaze, saw the hatred and the hunger for power that burned there. Zorn sneered, his sharp teeth glinting in the harsh light of the moon's distant sun. "Peace?" he spat. "There can be no peace as long as your kind holds sway over the Unas. We will not rest until we have taken back what is rightfully ours." Terry shook his head, a sense of weariness settling over him. "The old ways are gone, Zorn. We have a chance to build something new, something better, a future where humans and Unas can live and work together as equals." Zorn laughed, a harsh grating sound. "Equals? You really believe that? Your kind will always seek to dominate, to control. It is in your nature." He took a step forward, his clawed hand resting on the hilt of his blade. "No, human, there will be no peace, only war until one of us is left standing." Terry tensed, realizing too late the depth of his miscalculation. Zorn's followers began to close in, their weapons trained on him. He had walked into a trap, and there was no way out. But before Zorn could give the order to fire, a massive explosion rocked the meeting site. The ground heaved and buckled, throwing Terry and the Loyalists off their feet. Through the smoke and debris, Terry saw Pixis and his commandos charging forward, their weapons blazing. They had tracked Terry's location, had followed him, despite his orders to the contrary. Chaos erupted as the two sides clashed. Energy blasts crisscrossed the battlefield, the air thick with the stench of ozone and burning flesh. Terry scrambled to his feet, searching desperately for Zorn amidst the mayhem. He found him at the center of the maelstrom, his blade flashing as he cut down commando after commando. Terry charged forward, tackling Zorn to the ground. They grappled in the dirt, trading blows with a savage fury. Zorn was strong, his scaly hide resistant to Terry's strikes, but Terry was fueled by a righteous anger, a determination to end this conflict once and for all. He pummeled Zorn with a relentless barrage of punches, feeling the satisfying crunch of bone and cartilage beneath his fists. Zorn fought back with the ferocity of a cornered animal, his claws raking deep gashes across Terry's chest and arms. But in the end, Terry's resolve proved stronger. With a final desperate lunge, he wrapped his hands around Zorn's throat and squeezed with all his might. Zorn thrashed and bucked, his eyes bulging from their sockets. Then, with a sickening crack, he went limp. Terry staggered to his feet, his breath coming in ragged gasps. Around him the battle was winding down, the last few Loyalists either surrendering or falling to the commandos' blasters. But the victory was bitter. As Terry searched the battlefield for Pixis, he found him lying in a spreading pool of his own blood, a Loyalist sniper's shot having found its mark. Terry cradled his friend's head in his lap, tears streaming down his cheeks. Pixis looked up at him, his eyes already glazing over. "I'm sorry," Terry choked out, his voice thick with emotion. "I should have listened to you, I should have—" His eyes slipped shut, his last breath rattling in his chest. Terry bowed his head, a wail of grief tearing itself from his throat. The Loyalists were defeated, the Unas free at last, but the cost had been too high. Pixis, his brother-in-arms, was gone, and a part of Terry had died with him. He barely remembered the journey back to Earth, the long hours spent staring out the viewport at the endless expanse of stars. The hero's welcome that awaited him felt hollow, the cheers and accolades ringing false in his ears. In the weeks that followed, Terry went through the motions, attending the endless round of ceremonies and celebrations. But his heart wasn't in it. He had won the war, but lost something irreplaceable in the process. He knew that the Unas would have to find their own way forward, that they would have to learn to govern themselves and heal the wounds of the past. and he knew that he could no longer be a part of that process. So he made a decision. He would step back, would retire from public life, and let the next generation take up the mantle of leadership. He had given all he could give, had sacrificed more than any one person should have to. As he packed his bags and prepared to leave the capital, he took one last look around the office that had been his home for so long. The walls were lined with holopics of him and Pixis, of the battles they had fought and the victories they had won. But now those memories were bittersweet, tinged with the knowledge of what had been lost. Terry squared his shoulders and picked up his bag, ready to face the uncertain future that lay ahead. He knew that the road would be long and hard, that there would be many challenges still to come, but he also knew that he would face them as he always had, with courage, determination, and the memory of those who had fought and died at his side. For Pixis, for the Unas, and for the hope of a better tomorrow. You have reached the end of the story. If you enjoyed this story and want to support us, please leave a like and subscribe to our channel, and for every comment that says 88, I will heart every single one of them. Thank you for your time.